Hey everybody, this is Rebel Builder and I have my TIE Defender MOC. This has been one of the most requested builds on my channel and it was great to finally get this thing done. This is a very popular ship considering it's never been in any of the movies. It made its first appearance in the Star Wars TIE Fighter video game and has been very popular in the extended universe. And now it's making an appearance in Star Wars Rebels, so it will be canon even. So that's great news for fans of this ship. To be honest, I thought this was going to be an easy ship to build. You know, you got this cockpit section, you got some triangle wings. I thought it would be easy, but this actually ended up being one of my most challenging builds, mainly from an engineering standpoint. I had to do a lot of reworking, a lot of rebuilding, going back to the drawing board and just rethinking how to make these connections. You know, when you're building at these funny angles like this, you know, this 120 degree split there is very difficult in Lego. There's only a few pieces that allow you to do that. Hopefully I pulled it off here. Let's start with the cockpit section here. You know, generally this should just be a round bubble similar to the TIE Fighter. I kind of went a different direction. I was really on a kick after building my TIE Bomber using these 3x2 round slopes. So I did that on the side and did this little indentation of some round slopes on the side. And the same in the back here, you know, just trying to step it back. And of course throwing these little bits of sand blue in here just because sand blue is awesome. Same TIE Fighter windshield piece here and the same design on my blasters here. You know, these are not flick fire missiles. They're just kind of those little red cone pieces there. And of course, you know, this piece, like the other TIE Fighter sets and the TIE Fighter MOCs, this folds down and this lid opens up. You can see I've got my TIE Fighter pilot in there. Now every time I do one of these TIE Fighter MOCs, I end up with a different design on the cockpit as far as controls and details. I don't get too carried away. You can see I've got these 2x1 cheese slopes in there with stickers on. Those came from another set, and then I included just the transparent red cheese slopes there in front. Just trying to, you know, make up a different design, go with something different this time. And there behind the pilot, you can see I have one of those printed tiles. You know, that's kind of an imperial looking computer piece. You can see in this section here, I've got the 2x1 round slope, and in the back section here, I've got this inverted 2x1 round slope. I love using those pieces. You know, again, just trying to create my own style and some consistency through this ship and my other MOCs. Now for the wings here, I did the same design I've used on my Interceptor and the TIE Bomber, where I have a layer of plates on the inside, the light bluish gray plates, and black plates on either side of that. Now there's kind of two ideas, two directions you could go. One being like the First Order TIE Fighter, where you could have kind of a, you know, hinges and a layer of plates going around here to create the look of, you know, the gray leading edges. And I've seen MOCs online that use those. I think that's a great design. I just kind of went with the same pattern on my some of my other builds. So that's how I ended up with this. So I did something a little unconventional. You know, down here I have the studs out, and then on the top I have the studs out on both sides. So by going with that pattern, I should have had, you know, kind of the underside of the stud showing up here. But I flipped these two edges just because that's kind of the most prominent edge you see, the most prominent face. And so I flipped those two just so you had studs on the outside that you saw the most. And here I flipped this one up a couple of notches so I can give you a better look. But again, like my other builds, I've got these black tiles, this printed round tile here, like the other TIE Fighter sets. You know, I wanted all of my TIE Fighter MOCs to kind of look like sets, to look like they're similar. You know, I want them to have similar styles and similar builds. So, you know, a lot of this looks just like my TIE Interceptor too. And here, you know, we need to have these gray, you know, struts going through. And with this kind of design, I went with what they did on the TIE Striker, just kind of a little round plate here, and then, you know, a couple of tiles. That's kind of the hardest little bit to kind of really get in there really well, especially considering these are at funny angles, you know, supposedly going from the corners up to here. So this was the best I could do there. You might notice on the bottom of the solar panels, the bottom wings here, I've got this extra plate under here. It's just a 1x8 plate, and that literally is there to keep the thing upright. Without that piece, it's too front heavy and the whole ship would tip over. One aspect of this build that kind of caught me off guard is when you're doing all these details and the builds of the wings, you have to replicate those things 6 times. So I used a lot of parts. I was kind of maybe a little just not mentally prepared for that. But you can see I've got these blasters here on the end of the wings. Now we're going to start looking at some of the really challenging aspects of this build. You can see for this connection here, this section, I mimicked what I had with my TIE Fighter MOC. And really that wasn't the initial design. Originally I was going to use one of these 3x2 cones and had an axle, and it connected all the way through this section. And I really had that built that way for most of this process. But the problem is because of the weight of these wings, it just created too much stress. It was too flimsy because at the end of this cone here where this black tile or this dark gray tile is, it would create this whole thing where the whole joint would flex and want to tip, and the ship would actually kind of sag. And I was just not happy with that. You know, I do build, you know, from a model standpoint where I want something to look cool on the shelf, but I got to pick it up. I got to swish it around the room a little bit. And so I at least wanted something I could pick up and not have it fall apart. So that led me to a lot of challenges. The way I have these connections built, they're actually built from the back studs going forward. So everything's kind of at a 90-degree angle compared to what I'm used to. And I went through a lot of different techniques, trial and error, trying to get these connections built. I ended up using the hooks like I've used on the TIE Fighter, like they used on the First Order TIE Fighter. But I had to change the direction, so you can see I've got these modified plates with the handles, and they're on the outside instead of something I could hide on the front here. So it's a strong enough connection, you know, it holds on. And I was lucky with that. You know, it was really a challenge getting all the different studs and plates and hooks to all kind of line up at the right angle and be at the same level to actually work. So this was really something I was relieved that actually I got to make work. Now let's look at the back section here. I'm really actually proud of how this all looks. I achieved the look. I mean, it's just got a lot of chunky pieces in it, but I think these 4x2 wedge plates are kind of what seal the deal for me. And I like the engine here. So what I did is I have one of these kind of round octagonal pieces in here. Then I have some clips and then just 2x1 round slopes. I did 8 of those going around, and I got my little engine inside of there. But the challenge to this build, the whole structure, is really not the best kind of connection. So what I have at the back of my cockpit section, I have just a 2x1 brick with the axle hole in it, and then I have one axle that kind of goes through this whole section here. And I don't know if you can really tell, but you know, the top part does sag down a little bit. It's drooping a little bit. So that axle was kind of the main piece that I had to build off of. And this is a lot of parts, it's a lot of weight to just build off of one axle. So I have some kind of plates and I just kind of layered backwards. And then here in the middle, I have one of those Technic connectors that just has the 3-pronged little axle pieces on the end of that. Built these off of here. So I have these bricks here on these connections with, you know, the 2x1 bricks with the axle hole. And through most of this, I have axles going through here, just trying to give it more strength and more rigidity. But it was a challenge trying to come up with all these directions, and then you want to fill in. And of course, none of the plates line up. None of the, you know, studs allow you to kind of connect from this piece to here. So these are all independent builds, all kind of working off these, you know, 3-pronged axle pieces. And I was just doing all I could to kind of give it more strength and more rigidity. So I actually have another one of those 3-pronged axle pieces here, and then one in here. And so this chunk of dark bluish gray is really just another one of those 2x1 bricks with the axle holes. So it's connected here, and then it's connected inside of here. Now for this section here, you know, this might be bordering on illegal techniques as far as like an official Lego set, I'm not sure. But what I have is a plate here with some, you know, grill tiles on the front, and then a bracket here and a round slope. But all that's holding these together is I have this little 1x1 round plate, and it kind of overlaps with the tips of these wedge plates, and that's all that's holding it together. But I needed something to fill in some of the gaps there. And you know, again, these challenges kind of lead you down some roads that I think in the end ended up looking pretty cool. But in the end, I don't think I did a good enough job to make this, you know, worthy of being a Lego set. So here, if I pick it up, it does have flex. It does kind of wobble around. You can see it kind of sags here. These top wings, solar panels kind of sag here. You know, I did my best. I really spent a lot of time, you know, working on these connections, trying to come up with different ways to build it. And I gotta be honest, this was a challenge to build, to the point where I almost gave up on this project a few times. You know, I'd go down some roads and, you know, the ship wasn't holding together. I don't think it looked very good. Did a lot of, you know, trial and error, and I almost gave up quite a few times. Almost just took the whole thing apart and wasn't gonna do it. But I'm glad I stuck with it. I think it's a very distinct looking fighter. It's very popular. Lots of people are fans of this ship. You know, the video games, the extended universe, and pretty soon Star Wars Rebels. So I'm glad to be able to add this to my TIE Fighter fleet. You know, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this build, so leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you think. And I'd appreciate a thumbs up on this video as always. And if you're new to my channel, I'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button. I got some cool ideas for some new MOCs, some builds. Hopefully we get some new sets in 2017 I can do some reviews on. You don't want to miss out on all that. So thanks for watching, everybody. I'll be back soon.